It's great to be here on the latest podcast by good friend Craig Mulholland, Academy Director at Rangers. Hi, Craig.
Delighted to be here, Donald. You've been trying to get me on for a while, so I'm glad we got here eventually.
I know, a busy man. And you're actually telling me it's sunny down there. And it's just
I know you don't get down to civilization very often, Donald, but yeah, the weather's good down here today. Absolutely.
I know, that's great. I was going to, we'll speak just in a wee bit about, your work at the Academy and how that's developed and about your influences in the game. But I flicked on the TV last night and there was Wraith Rovers Dunfermline on, and I seen a couple of the boys playing there. And every time I switch on the TV now, I'll see boys across the country, particularly in, the Championship playing and in different clubs from the Academy. What's the because that's really increased over the last few years. What's the philosophy behind, getting the younger boys out to senior clubs?
I think there's a number of points probably, Donald, with that. I think first of all, if I've been honest, it's been a reaction to the pandemic as well, because some of our B team players should have been playing the Challenge Cup this year. They get cancelled. Should have been playing the UEFA Youth League this year. It got cancelled. We're playing the Glasgow Cup and it got cancelled. So what we had to do was react quite quickly and look for a different solution to that transition from sort of under 18s towards the first team. Something we'll maybe touch on later, I guess, is I don't think as a country we've got that transition from under 18s to the first team right at all. Yeah. So we need to look at different models for that, and we're working hard on that at the moment. But one of the things that we did want to do, Donald, is really explain to the players that every player's got an individual plan, an individual path. And you know what happens with young players? They tend to compare themselves to other players. Really, it should be that you versus you mentality and saying, right, what's the best journey for you? And what we need to become more expert at is saying, what does the player have? What does the player need? And then what journey do we need to put him on as a consequence? So you'll have Nathan Patterson, who goes straight from the academy into the first team and has done exceptionally well. Leon King at the moment went straight from the academy to the first team, is training with the first team. But you'll have other players who go on a different journey. So if you take Stephen Kelly last year, really good example, does brilliantly in the Championship with Ayr United, then moves up to Ross County in the Premier League this year, up your neck of the woods, and then obviously hopefully comes back or maybe goes on another loan after that and goes on a slightly different journey. So we've got a range of players out on loan at the moment, Donald. Not every player will need to go on loan for sure. Some will go on different routes, but what it is giving them at the moment is a experience of first team football, really competitive action, playing against men on a weekly basis, trying to find a style that matches the Rangers style is quite challenging sometimes in the lower divisions, but they all need different things. So Adam Devine, for example, at the moment is out on loan at Brecon City, and the real objective for him is that contact sort of men's football bit. Whereas Kai Kennedy, you watched last night at Wraith Rovers, the style that Wraith Rovers play, and John McGunn's got them playing, is fantastic.
Superb.
It's really like a Rangers style. So for Kai, he's getting a lot of the, not identical, but a lot of the attributes we expect him to get a young Rangers player would want to have. So I think, Donald, it's a big part of our programme. Billy Kirkwood does a terrific job monitoring all our loans. Kevin Thompson's working closely with them as well. So I think they can't just go and loan as a Rangers player and we just let them go. We must be really all over the top of them in terms of their diet, their body fats, their S&C programme, their technical bits, watching their clips. So there's a really robust programme sits behind that. But it's one element of the pathway. I do still think, though, as a country, we've got a big decision ahead in terms of what we do, transitioning those players from the academy to the first team. But it's great to see Rangers loan players there. And I suppose, Donald, when we started the project 6 years ago, many of the players, if they were going loan, maybe League One and League Two, we've now got a load of players in the Championship. Every week you've got a Rangers player playing against a Rangers player in the Championship, which brings a nice rivalry. And then you've actually got a lot of players in the Premiership, and we've also got the likes of Josh McPake playing down in the EFL as well. So more opportunities, and certainly, again, going back to the point, a different journey for each player is really, really important.
It sounds, I think it's brilliant, Craig, and also, it's in a lot of ways it's quite sophisticated, isn't it? Because as you say, it's individual pathways, and it demands off the guys as well as the football side a maturity not to try to eyeball someone else's journey and say I should be doing that, isn't it? I should go straight in.
Definitely, and that's hard, isn't it? Because you talk about your external influences, and I've heard you speak about this many times with the young boys. Actually saying, right, who influences you most, and do you have all your external influences correct that are giving you information? So we've got agents who play a big part in it now. You've got parents who play a big part in it now. And often it's the agents or the parents that look at somebody else's journey and say, why is he doing that and you're not doing that? So we spoke, for example, yesterday to one boy in the academy who we're not going to put on loan, and he's going to stay and play with under 18s. But when we looked at his first half of the season, he was a sub for the B team most of the year. He played against men's football, and as a 17-year-old, he found that really tough. So we call it sort of stretch and stress and safe zones. So he had loads of stretch zones, he had loads of stress zones. So now what he needs between now and the summer is a fairly safe zone where he feels like the best player again. He can really go and hone his learning. And then by the time he leaves in the summer, he's ready to come back, and we'll stress him again with more men's football and really go and push that learning. So I think it's about monitoring these individual journeys. And even from when I started this, Donald, see the different disciplines in terms of your own side from a psychological perspective, the sports science side from a physical perspective, the medical side, monitoring their minutes, monitoring their load, monitoring the challenge. You need to take all of that into account, and then often you'll get the majority of the decisions right, hopefully.
Yeah.
There'll be some that you'll put in loan that won't work, and people often say, this is a real risk actually. Well, he can't get a game for whoever, how can he play for Rangers? Well, that might not be the case.
Yeah.
It might be he's actually got something from that loan that will help him in his journey to play for Rangers, even though he's not necessarily played every week, whatever it may be. So, yeah, you're right. Individualising the journey is key, and explaining this to the young players, the parents, the agents, and all those influencers round about it is absolutely critical.
And seeing where on this point, Craig, let's just carry on with it, because I know you're really keen on the Colts coming into the league, and what's your thinking behind that, and how's it developing?
Yeah, I think it's probably the most fundamental project over the last 18 months that we've worked on, because some things to consider, Donald, are if you look across Europe, and there might be a country that we've not found yet, but in all the countries that we've studied, there's not another country we can find that has a gap from their under-18s to their first team and nothing to fill it. So they might have an under-23s, they might have reserve football, they might have B-team football, they might have strategic partnerships, but every country we look at in Europe's got something. Scotland's the only country where there's nothing. So we often wonder, think of any business you've worked in, the companies you advise, see you've developed talent all the way from age 8 through 18, and then you're going to get them probably hitting first teams at age 19, 20, 21, but you've got a 2-3 year gap where you have no provision to continue that development.
Yeah.
You would think that's crazy.
Yeah, you would, totally.
So that's where we are as a country. So the B teams is really important to us, but I think probably one of the key points, Donald, is that where we've maybe failed as a country in the past is we've always tried a one-size-fits-all, right? So what have we tried? Under-21s, we've tried under-19s, we've tried reserve football. And for some clubs that would work. But if you look at our country, we're a country of different size clubs, different revenue streams, different facilities, different performance provision. So therefore, what we probably need to get to here is a menu and actually say to our clubs, right, be more entrepreneurial, choose the option that works best for you. So for Rangers or Celtic or Aberdeen, it might be a B team. Now, there's a big cost associated with that in terms of staff, having a team at 3 o'clock on the Saturday when your first team might be playing, number of players. But that might be, because we've got some of Scotland's best talent, the best vehicle for them to get early exposure to first team football. If you're at a different club, you might choose a strategic partnership, because you might think you've only got 4 or 5 real talents. You work with another club and you put them there. If you're at a different club, you might think the loan model, where you've got 1 or 2 top talents, works well for you. But what we want to do is join up all those clubs in Scottish football to provide these young players with more opportunities. And one of the questions I always get asked is, wait a minute, will that benefit Rangers and Celtic? Of course it will. We wouldn't be asking to do it if we didn't think it would. But there's now 9 out of Europe's top 12 leagues are operating with B teams. And I heard someone on the radio recently say that those countries that operate with B teams, they're top countries. Well, is that not the point? Is that not what we want to become? So the evidence exists. If you look at the Croatian World Cup squad, Donald, 56% of the players who played in the Croatian World Cup final squad came through B teams in their country. They've got the same population base as Scotland. Now, I'm not saying this is the panacea that's going to cure all our ills. It's not, because it has to be a combination of other things. We need to improve other things as well. But what it certainly is we've got a major step towards it. But it's not just B teams. It's about joining up the pyramid. It's about the lower league teams, the higher league teams that are aspirational, get a chance to come into Scottish football. Look at up your way, Brora, who's been fantastic the last couple of years. They should get that chance, rather than clubs who've maybe been in the league for 130 years. That doesn't mean to say you should be in the league for the next 130 years.
Exactly.
So let's encourage aspiration. Let's push. Let's develop. And again, not all these players on Rangers and Celtic, B teams and Aberdeens will play for us. We're still going to have 1 or 2 that will come through to our first team. But what it means is that other players will leave our academies with 100 first team, 80 first team games under their belt, which makes them much more attractive to other clubs, raises the whole standard of Scottish football. And if this is some of our best talent, let's give them first team football, lots of it early, but with the provision with the best coaches, the best facilities, the best sports science, the best psychology program, as well as a competitive first team football at 3 o'clock on a Saturday. So hopefully, Donald, we can actually get a proposal through at some point where there's not just wins for Rangers and Celtic. It benefits every club. It benefits Scottish football. And without being too cynical about it, if every other country just about in Europe of a similar size can do it, why can't we in Scotland? It's almost like we're afraid of positive change.
Yeah, I know.
We need to push that, don't we?
And what's the arguments against it then, Craig? Apart from it'll benefit Rangers and Celtic, is there any other, kind of footballing arguments against it?
I think that's one of the challenges we put out to people, saying, right, we understand you don't like it, but we've presented lots of evidence to show why it works. We've presented lots of evidence to show why all the concepts work, strategic partnerships, not just B teams. Can you show us the evidence to say why we don't want it? And probably, Donald, the truth, there's this bit of authenticity of the league. So there's things in the proposal like the squad be a fixed squad. They can't move out with transfer windows. Players can't jump between your first team and the B team. It would be under 21s. You've not got a 22-year-old or a 23-year-old coming to play in it. The level of staff, and we must have directors. We must honour. Sometimes I think, because I've been at Rangers a long time, you sometimes forget that I was a coach at Queen's Park. I played with Queen's Park. I was at Alloa. I was at Dumbarton. So I fully understand the passion that exists in the lower leagues. And the last thing we would want to do, Donald, is compromise that in any way, shape or form. But what we do think, if we can add fans, we can add sponsors, we can add television deals, we can actually add quite a lot of finance to the lower leagues, which might reinvigorate the lower leagues. And whilst I'm sure some of the supporters of the lower league clubs might not want to play Rangers and Celtic B teams, they'll come along that Saturday absolutely desperate to beat our lads. And that's what we want in terms of a challenge for them as well. And it'll hopefully add an excitement to those divisions. So.
And I hope that at some point goes through, Craig, because I think it'll make a big difference. And I know a lot of the guys I speak to within football are right behind it as well. And I think that's one that you touched on it there. That's sometimes one of the downsides of, as a country, having such a historical culture a certain way, or an amateur culture, and I don't mean that in a bad way about, the smaller clubs. We don't want to let go of it because it's seen as taking a risk and Rangers and Celtic will take over. But I don't think it's about that, really.
No, Donald, there's some unbelievable work getting done by our clubs in the lower leagues. And as I say, I've been there. I've worked voluntary for Queen's Park, coaching young players, and there's, your games and the supporters are not very many, but they're as passionate about their club as Rangers and Celtic fans are about their club. So what we need to do here is try and bring Scottish football together, move in that direction together, be positive, and I think give everybody the respect that they're due. And I think we can achieve that by providing wins for everybody. But what we must also do, Donald, is we must continue to modernise, because if we're honest, over the last 20, 25 years, have we been elite at talent development? And I think most people in the game would probably say they've not. And if I think about we'll touch on this later, I guess, my own journey, there's been certain influencers in your time that's come up from maybe England or other places, and you've went, I thought I knew what elite looked like, but actually I've been stuck in this Scottish football bubble that I maybe didn't. And sorry, I'm not meaning to be detrimental to Scottish football, because there's so much good stuff, so many talented players and so many good people in it. But sometimes we need to make sure that we're open-minded to new ideas and that we're willing to move forward in a positive way.
Yeah, totally. And, you mentioned it there, Craig, about your own journey coming through and being at Queen's Park and Alloa, and who has been your big influences, developing your thinking on the game, especially when you were playing and you were involved with it, at the likes of Queen's Park?
Yeah, I think probably the first one for me, Donald, was Ian Munro. I don't know if you remember Ian. He was the manager at Hamilton. I played with Hamilton, and his detail and coaching, he came from a teaching background. Really, really kind of enthused me, and I probably hadn't seen that before with coaches and managers. And Ian he's working out in Philadelphia Union now with Tommy Wilson, who then was another big influence on me with Tommy when we worked together at the SFA. And Tommy probably took you into, at the time I was at Glasgow University doing an accounts degree. That's what I thought I was going to become, was an accountant. And I was playing part-time with Hamilton and Queen's Park and clubs like that. And then Tommy presented this opportunity to get into coaching. And actually, in the final year of my degree, an accounts degree, I hated it, Donald. Because I knew my career was going to lie somewhere else. I used to go to lectures at the university wearing an SFA tracksuit one day because you were coaching. And then the next day turn up with your Hamilton Accies tracksuit on because you were going to training. And the students in this accounts class must say, what is he doing? Turn up to a finance lecture with a bag of balls over his shoulder, you know. So that was strange. But at that point, it took you in a different direction. So from a coaching point of view, Ian was the first. Tommy then gave him a magnificent opportunity to me. But through the journey I've had at Rangers, Donald, I've been really lucky. I mean, before I went to Rangers at the SFA, Jim Fleeting, who you know, is just probably the biggest influence he had is just as a personality and a massive character and a good guy. Yeah, he's a top football guy, but actually he probably demonstrated he can be a good person in a cutthroat industry, but still have a lot of respect. And Jim's a top guy, as you well know. And then through Rangers, and we can touch on this in more detail, when the likes of Mark Warburton arrived from down south and really challenged a lot of our thinking. Then obviously Mark Allen coming from Man City, Ross Wilson coming from Southampton, and the current manager coming from Liverpool. They've taken what I perceive to be best practice to a completely different level and challenged us. And Matt Warburton used to use a phrase, Donald. He said sometimes in Scotland you don't know what you don't know. And that used to be really great at me. What do you mean we don't know what we don't know? I need to find out what we don't know. And that was a great challenge because, as you know, you've done it when you work at the club, and you've guided me and other members of staff, and you've always challenged and provoked just with a wee comment. And you know, sometimes that wee comment can actually say, that's going to stimulate me doing something else. And Mark certainly had that bit. So, I've been really lucky. A lot of good influences, working with a lot of experienced people, and also, Donald, a chance to go to other countries and see lots of other practice, attend tournaments and things like that, which then shapes and changes your view and personality. And probably if I reflect on a 20-odd year career in professional football, the first 15 years I probably thought I was good, that I was doing well, but I actually didn't know. Whereas the last 4 or 5 years has really opened up my eyes to something quite different, which will hopefully then benefit me in my career, but also importantly, like the Rangers that I'm working with at the moment.
It's interesting, Craig, actually, as you were speaking about, Tommy and what you were doing at Glasgow Uni and the fine arts, because it's almost like you were doing a sports director's course, isn't it? When you think of it now.
I'll tell you a great story, and I remember getting endless stick for this. I think Big Ian Maxwell, the current chief executive of the SFA, might be on the bus at the time. I can't remember, but I was playing with Queen's Park. We were playing Aberdeen in a reserve game on a Monday night or something up at Pittodrie. But I had a tax exam the next day. And anybody who's ever done tax law, it's 6 massive books that you take with you. I remember sitting in the Parks and Hamilton bus, as Queen's Park had, and the boys all giving me stick because I'm sitting with these 6 big books, trying to study at the table, going up to Pittodrie to play a game. I think we lost 5-0. Scott Booth scored a hat-trick or something. Coming back down the road, and then you get these books out again. You know what the football dressing room can be like. You get absolute stick. But I really enjoyed combining the academic side with the football side. And I think you're right. When you look at the job now, a lot of the stuff you learn there from contract law, from budgeting, from people management, economics, you never really thought that would be so relevant in the job. But if you look at the size of academies now, there's absolutely the football performance side, but there's so many other aspects as you go to it. And that grounding was really, really good actually in terms of preparing you for what you now do.
I think, Craig, it is, it's so much more. I often ask the question on the SFA when I'm doing the badges. I show the Bill Shankly quote, about football, a simple game. Is it still simple? And, often, and I think it's so true, is that, the fundamentals of the game can remain the same, but the stuff around the sides and important stuff has got deeper, and there's more aspects to it than 20 years ago, without a doubt, I think.
There is, Donald. I think that's simple, but I think that's really important, though. I think the players, the athletes that are front-facing, I think what we need to do, see if you look at the amount of data you get now and the amount of information you get from so many different sources, you could be actually feel overwhelmed by it if you don't manage it in the correct way. And if you look at the players don't need all that. So I think the trick for a head of academy, for a coach, for a head of coaching, is to actually take all the modern research, take all the data, take all the science, and put it across in a way that still feels pretty simple for the players. Some of your absolute top practitioners are really clear on what they want. It's really simple. The terminology works for the players. And that doesn't mean to say behind the scenes we should be trying to push, and we shouldn't be. There's almost a bit in football, Donald, over the years, and I think it's changing now, that anything academic was seen as being, no, let's keep that outside it. That doesn't fit in football. I think coaching has become an art. I think that the science behind it all, if I look at Ross Wilson and what he's brought from Southampton to Rangers, and his processes and the way he negotiates deals, the way he deals with people, the structures that he puts in behind things, it really is top level leadership and management, and there's a science behind that.
Yeah.
So I think what we need to do is keep that science, learn as much as we can, make sure we're really pushing the game in a much more open-minded way than perhaps other sports did in the past, behind the scenes, but actually still keep it that the players must enjoy it, they must love it, they must have relationships. And some of our coaches, the best strength they've got is relationships with the players, but keep it really simple for them, because the game's not changed in the sense that the players are still the same ultimately. Yeah, tactics have changed, information have changed, there's trends in the game will change, but let's keep that bit really, really simple. And you talk about body language a lot, you talk about the language we use, but let's not also be embarrassed behind the scenes with that, to actually go and say, right, can we really push ourselves and use every, talk about marginal gains and every bit of research that's out there, and actually challenge ourselves to be uncomfortable in those areas. And I know on a personal level, one of the areas that I need to improve upon is the amount of data that we're now getting, and the amount of insight from the data that we're now getting. Is processing that and make sure I use that in a way that's going to benefit the academy, benefit Rangers, and ultimately benefit the young players.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Craig. I was telling someone a story just a couple of days ago about data, and it was in a different sport. I was working in GP2, you know, the one just underneath Formula One, and I was sitting with the driver I was working with, and you know how much data gets thrown out of these cars, just phenomenal. And the engineer, we were going through, and the driver coach was going through all the data. And he says, look, we could look at that line going up and down there. And he said to the driver, see, we can get, you know, a tenth here. You know, if you just brake a little bit later going into the corner based on that line. And then he looked at me and said, mind you, he's going 180 miles an hour when he's going into that corner. Just brake a bit later. Bang. And I think that's the thing about football as well, isn't it? It's being able to, people like yourself and other coaches, that's the art, isn't it? It's being able to take that data and put it in a way that the players can get the most out of it as well.
Yeah, again, another big learning moment for me was we had an audit from Double Pass. Pass are one of the auditors. They go around the world. They've done the English Premier League, they do the MLS, they've done the German League, and they basically come to your club. It's a bit like a school inspection for anyone who doesn't know. They sit and they watch coaching sessions, they interview all your staff, they interview your parents, they interview the players. And see if you're in my role, it's almost like being a head teacher and you're nervous for that period of time. Like, what's the outcome of this inspection going to be? So we were really fortunate that we received an outcome of 88%, which was great. But I think, you know me, you know our staff, Donald, you know where we want to go. Our question wasn't about what's the 88%, what's the 12%?
Yeah.
And the 12% we missed, Donald, was in coaching, right?
Yeah.
What I couldn't get my head around was so the average with the Belgian clubs, for example, I think was 62%. I said to Double Pass, I don't understand that. We're a Scottish club who are not renowned for producing talent in this country, Scotland. The Belgians at the moment are producing top players all the time. How can they be sitting at 62%? But we, for example, scored 88%. And what they said was we scored really highly in the areas of player care, welfare, education, sports science, facility, all those provisions. But the 12% we missed at that time related to coaching. Whereas, although the Belgians were only scoring 62%, they might not have the best facilities, they might not have the best academic programme, but they almost scored 100% in the coaching area, right? So this fascinated me.
Yeah.
I said, okay, so what's the difference between Belgian coaching and Scottish coaching? Or it actually turned out to be UK coaching, they felt. And what they were saying was, see the planning of the session. A Scottish coach might spend, they said, maybe half an hour at his desk planning the session, and then have a 50% intervention rate in the session to get his learning objectives right, because the planning in detail hasn't quite been what it's been. So
adjust it.
The Belgian coach is spending 2 hours planning that same length of session, but is maybe only in the session for 20% of it. And the session then becomes the teacher, and those behaviours that get inculcated with the players happen as a consequence of the session. So I thought this is fascinating for us. So what we then did was we actually appointed 2 new full-time people into sort of bespoke roles who are not with a team, who don't have a timetable with a team, where you know them both, Neil McIntosh and then we changed Graham Murty's role from being with a team to actually saying, right, how do we develop our coaches to make sure they're planning properly, that detail, and the session then becomes the teacher rather than the coach. And I think for our young Scottish players, see if they can make better decisions and they can actually identify situations, but really in a really simple way. And we don't need the coach coming in and using language that young players don't understand. The session becomes the teacher. But as I go back to what I said earlier, Donald, the science behind it is educating our coaches to make sure we are the absolute best at planning in detail and putting restrictions in the session, which forces a behaviour from the player in the session without having to stop it every 2 minutes and reinforce it. So that's hopefully an example of the combination of the academic side, sitting behind the desk, but actually the football side for the young player being enjoyable and actually almost, you know, that this goes back to when you drive a car, you don't think about it now. You just go and do it. To use that analogy. A young Scottish player to go and make a decision in the right moment, and he almost subliminally doesn't know why he's done it, but it's just a repetition of practice that's been set up by really well planned and constructed sessions on the other side. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally, Craig. And I think there's a cultural element there where I think in the past, just generally, we would see sitting at our desk and planning as a wasting time and being on the pitch without the planning. But even though we're having to intervene 50% of the time, that's the work, and the thinking is wasting time. You know, and I think that's a great example here.
Well, actually, when we first introduced this, one of the coaches came to me and he said, "That's fine, no problem. I'll just go in the session less. I'll just say less." I says, "No, that's not quite the point. You can only say less if we've actually the actual session becomes you know." And even when I look at, I mean, we've got a fantastic coach at the first team, Michael Beale, and Michael's sessions, the players love them. They are really engaged in them, and the sessions actually teaching them. Michael still comes in and teaches, of course. But his planning and detail behind it is such that if you watch the performance of our first team this year, everyone knows what they're doing. Almost every practice Michael does relates to what they're going to do on a Saturday. Now, for young players in the academy, that's slightly different because first teams are about performance, we're about development. But it might simply be that our sessions actually centre around 3 or 4 of our best players and their particular needs within that session. So I think the planning and detail, Donald, is critical and probably something that a nation would not been great at, but I think it is changing. I think Scottish coaching is getting better.
And we've talked already a lot about what you've been doing and what you've been involved in developing with the academy and onto the coming onto the Colts. But it's been, as you've mentioned, be about 6 years since you've initially kind of had that the project at the academy and developing it. Talk us a little bit through where was the vision you had, because and I know you're saying that how much it's improved and developed, and it was starting from a good point, but where was your vision? What was the vision you had 6 years ago about how you wanted the academy to be?
Yeah, I think the most challenging bit, first of all, was to probably challenge yourself. Scotland, I keep going back to the national game, but I think what we did as an academy is probably symptomatic of that as well. Scotland hadn't qualified for a World Cup for how many years? It hadn't qualified for a European Championship for how many years? Yet we were a nation of staff who probably patted ourselves in the back and kept telling each other we were doing a good job, and the reason was schools football or facilities or something, which had a factor, but it's probably excuses. I think the starting point, Donald, had to be to say, right, are we actually good at what we do? And are we prepared to really change what we do? And that can be difficult because there's norms. You've worked in football many years. There's norms that are accepted practices. We had to challenge those accepted practices, and that meant a real change management process. And obviously, some people were able to come on the journey with us. We had to change other people to get there. What I think we were really lucky with, Donald, was we had a board of directors who have been unbelievable, from the chairman Dave King and Paul Murray and John Gilligan and these guys who first came in when we started the project, through to people like Stuart Robertson and Andrew Dixon and John Bennett and Douglas Park now. They've been unbelievable, Graham Park and these guys, supporting what we do. Because Rangers traditionally, I suppose, was a club that if we wanted to improve at first team level, we went and bought Paul Gascoigne, we went and bought Brian Laudrup, we went and bought Tory Andrew Flo. So we're probably more of a recruitment club than a development club. Whereas I think going down the divisions meant that we could look at it in a slightly different way. And when you speak to Ross now, Ross Wilson, who's leading our football operation, is about player trading and making sure that the club's sustainable in that way. But it's also about developing our own talent. But I think the challenge to start with, Donald, was actually saying in terms of that vision, right, we need to almost really challenge what we've been part of, which then becomes a criticism of yourself and how you get to do that, and then go on a new vision. And we started off with culture. So you'll tell me, I'm sure in a 2 minutes, that with too many cultural items to shape behaviour. So normally when you look at any department or organisation's values, there's maybe 4 or 5 values maximum. We had 10. I thought that was important at the time in order to shape and challenge behaviours. We then looked at our playing style and said, right, what are the trends throughout Europe? What are the trends that are going to be in the modern game in 10 years' time? What do our young players need to know? and then changed the playing style at Rangers, which was quite dramatic. And we were fortunate there after that a Mark Warburton came in, or the current manager came in, and if you look at the current gaffer, we dominate the ball, so that style kind of goes all the way through the club now. We then did things like Beclair Academy, so it was about contact time. So at that point, I think our young players were still maybe 3 nights a week in a day release. Well, if you look at academies throughout Europe, that's not enough. We need more contact time. And even if you replicate street football years ago, think about the amount of time they had playing. So,
yeah, I know.
So we've got 32 players in Beclair Academy now, getting 18 hours of contact time a week. And then one of them, maybe it's worth speaking about individually, one of the big items we did was saying, right, let's no longer just play in Scotland. Let's come out of the Scottish Reserve League. Let's go and play Bayern Munich. Let's go and play Feyenoord. Let's go and play Man City. And wow, what a challenge that was, because our players really struggled. And you were part of it at the time, to see the psychological aspect of that, even that inferiority complex that young players had, it was almost overcoming that, saying, I can be as good as the Dutch lad, I can be as good as the German lad. Now, we never had that initially, but these young players grew into that. And then from there, it's really just from now, we need to start producing some outcomes on the back of all the processes that were changed over that period of time. And I think Nathan Patterson, hopefully, is the first part of that, and we'll have more outcomes on the back of that again. So the vision, Donald, was quite clear. We had to become in line with, people often talk about marginal gains. We had no interest in marginal gains. At the point when we were audited by double pass and we've achieved the 88%, that's us just getting towards the norms of what a good academy looks like. Now, hopefully, now that we've got to that point, we can now say, right, what are we actually going to be excellent at? What are we going to be renowned for? But the first part of the vision, Donald, over the first 5-6 years, was really just getting to a point that if you walked into our building, you would recognise, this seems like a high-performance elite environment, which probably, given everything the club had been through up to that point, wouldn't have been the case when we started the project.
It's interesting as well. Okay, if we talked a little bit about, I remember the period where you were taking the clubs and playing in Europe, because there was actually, again, it's similar to what you were speaking about with the Colts, because there was actually quite a lot of pushback within the country of Rangers doing that at that point, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was. That goes back to what I said, and to challenge the norm. So you could be in the Reserve League, Donald, and you could win the Reserve League year after year. And what we did actually as an interesting experiment was, the year after we did the European Games programme, I don't know if you remember, we were back in the Reserve League the following year. And see, when we look at the stats from the year we played all those top clubs, I'm talking about the physical stats in terms of output from the players, I'm talking about expected goals, the challenge that the players had that year compared to the following year where we did win the Reserve League. And, there's a lot of fairly comfortable games. The development for the players that year compared to the previous year wasn't even close. So we did get a lot of pushback, but most of the pushback, Don, came from not people who were dead against it. It was people who were just kind of set in their ways that okay, Rangers are not in a competitive league. Now, we wanted to be in a competitive league, but that wasn't available to us. But I'll tell you, the experiences, I remember the first game against PSV. We played PSV's under-23s or PSV Young. It was their B team. And somebody who you know well, Aidan Wilson, was a centre-back at the time. I know you spoke to Aidan. And they basically didn't play with a striker. So there's no striker. There was like a false nine, if you like. And then they had a couple of triggers in the game that when they broke, there was like 4 and 5 and 6 players all running at your back line. For Aidan, and I can't remember who was playing centre-back with him that day, what a challenge that was, because the whole time through Scottish football, he's used to playing against a centre-forward. So at half-time, he's saying, what do we do in that circumstance? And we're saying, well, you need to look at the spaces and you look at your distances, because on that trigger, they come at you like the red arrows. And I think we were 3-0 down at half-time or something, right? And people were saying, oh, the young Scottish players are not good enough. And at that point, I remember then we played Leicester at Ibrox. I don't know if you remember that one, Don.
Yeah, I do.
We lost 6-1 or something at Ibrox, like in an early game. I remember looking at the big screen at Ibrox thinking, Craig, this is maybe not your best idea, this, But by the end of that season, these players grew and they developed, and the inferiority complex disappeared. They understood systems better. And we went down to Leicester at the end of that season. I think we won 6-1 by the end of that season with the same team. And just to finish that story, I remember playing Liverpool at Ibrox, and of course the manager of the Liverpool squad was the current manager. And I think I remember he played a 3-box-3, and Stevie Kelly, who's now at Ross Kent, at half-time saying, we always encourage you players to fix it on the pitch. And we said, why did you not fix it on the pitch? Because we're getting overrun first half. And to be fair, he'd never seen that. So we then did a bit of research looking at the formations we played against the Scottish game, and it tended to be 4-2-3-1 all the time, or a variation of that, maybe a 4-4-2. within that one season, Donald, we played against 12 different formations.
Yeah.
And there was different styles within that different formation. So for a Stevie Kelly, for all the lads that were in that programme, the education they got was great, both in terms of that, believing we could go and stand up against them, these other nations, believing they could be as good as them, but actually tactical understanding. And every game, after the PSV game, I remember getting in the dressing room, and the boys were pretty much all slumped on the benches because they were so tired after it, because mentally and physically they'd been challenged in a way they hadn't been. And the final point on that, Daniel, my final point, I mean, you've got me going in my soapbox now, but the final point on that was we were 3-0 down to Liverpool at half time, and we actually said to the boys in the dressing room, guys, in your Rangers career since under 9s, under 10s, have you ever been 3-0 down at half time? Not one hand went up, Donald, not one. So what we were actually creating was the roadblocks and the adversity that makes them more resilient to overcome that probably we hadn't had in the programmes before, which they're absolutely going to need if they're going to go and play at Ibrox in front of 50,000.
And I think that was brilliant, Craig, because, I remember speaking about it with you at the time, and we must have been about 3/4 of the way through that season, and you looked at the starts, and it must have been about just after halfway through the season, the starts started to change. And it's something about, that's where yourself and the coaches and the board deserve great credit, because in any learning situation, that's the one where if you don't watch, your confidence goes down because you're not getting the results on the board, as you said, the 3-0 or the thing, but actually your skill levels is going up because you're having all these experiences. But the ultimate success is a little bit further in the future, isn't it? And the boys came through that.
Well, I'd love your view on this, because I know you were part of it with us as well, but it's really challenging that, isn't it? Because you're at a club who's won more trophies than any other club in the world, right? We're at a club that if we play Barcelona in the Champions League tomorrow, regardless of the fact it's Barcelona, our supporters, and I've been brought up in this, I know it, will still expect us to win, right? And here all of a sudden, we were going to challenge our players in a different way. That might mean we weren't going to necessarily win the game, right? Now, there was then loads of doubters about that. There was loads of criticism comes with that. And that's where you really need to stick true to your convictions and strong in your beliefs and see that long-term goal and say, do you know what? The only team that needs to win at Rangers is the first team. That's the only team that needs to win. Winning for these young players was getting that challenge, was overcoming the adversity, was overcoming the roadblock. And again, all at different stages in their journeys as we do that. And what we need to do is be careful how often we expose them to that, because if you overexpose them to that, it can become a problem. So there's times when they need to come back and play at their own age group and be the best player and feel really confident and believe in themselves again. But part of the challenge was actually managing the external message. If you're at, I'm trying to think, a club, maybe some of your Dutch clubs are AZ Alkmaar or somewhere that's renowned for producing talent. The pressure on their youth teams to win doesn't exist. Because all they do is produce talent. The first team has to win, that's it. Whereas there's such a profile around the Rangers youth teams that, your under 18s have good beat. Well, we might have had a load of under 16s or under 17s and we wanted to challenge them. So to changing that external perception and internally as well, Donald, was a big part of that process. And hopefully now we've got to a bit where that belief exists that actually there's no pressure on our Rangers under 11, 12, 13, 14 coach to go win a game. No pressure. We want to win, otherwise they'll never make the right decisions that's going to go and challenge that player. Now, don't get me wrong, Donald. We're in football, we're in sport. Why do we love sport? Because we want to win and lose. Nobody wants to win more than me. The message to the young Rangers player who's going out wearing that blue strip is never ever that it's okay to lose. No chance. They're going on that pitch expecting they want to win the game, because that's a mentality we want to create. But we as staff might take the decision that we're playing 7, 8 younger players up, and in our heads we probably know we're not going to win that match. But actually the player never gets that message. But us managing that process at the world's most successful club, where that culture exists, has been a real challenge as well, and something that we've enjoyed.
I think I remember us chatting years ago about that lens and that perception, Craig, and what you're saying there totally resonates with me, because the challenge is, isn't it, people externally and fans externally of Rangers, watching the first team will have and it's the challenge of actually having a great history and culture, paradoxically, because they'll look at the youth teams with the same lens as they look at the first team.
Correct,
and it's different metrics now, and I think that's where you take great credit, actually, and because I think in order to change something, someone has to put the stake in the ground and says, this is what we're looking at now. And it's hard, isn't it? Because you would have felt it, I'm sure. You've got that periods, like you were saying, in certain games or certain periods where most people will say, oh, you know what, let's just go back to the old way, isn't it? You know, the pressure's on you, just go, let's.
You often talk about flight or fight, right?
Yeah.
So when a coach is in that situation where, God, it's not going well, and so we've lost 6-1 against Leicester at Ibrox, right? The easy thing to do would be saying, I'll tell you what, we'll go back and we'll play 3 or 4 domestic games after that. We didn't. I think we then went and played Man City down at Man City, and you're playing against guys like you know, some really top players, Phil Fodens and people like that. They're making Man City's first team now. I think we ended up drawing 2 each with Man City down there that day. I think the changing point, we played Feyenoord and we drew 2 each with them at the end, and you've seen the boys actually start to believe. So you've got to be strong. I think also it's really topical in this day and age, isn't it? I think you've also got to stay off social media. I think you've got to have a real clear vision of where you're going, because you can't work at this football club or you can't work in these kind of levels of jobs if you get affected by that, because it would be a problem for you. But we had to change on what we were doing. And if let's take Nathan Patterson as a great example. He's just played in the last 32 of the Europa League, then played in the last 16 of the Europa League. Nathan's hardest struggle over the last couple of years is when we played Atletico Madrid at Firhill last year in the UEFA Youth League against Riquelme. And Riquelme was outstanding against him that day. He was really, really good. And Nathan struggled. But that struggle is probably providing Nathan with much more preparation to then go and play against some top players from the manager in the last 16 of the Europa League, than if we'd been playing domestically and Nathan's winning 4-5-0. We're all saying, oh, he looks like a great player, that's terrific. But actually, that moment, that game, he'll have taken more from that's now made him be successful in our Rangers first team. So that's really, really important that we expose the lads to that. And we need to accept that those who are not quite yet in the same wavelength of how we want to develop young players might criticise us at that point. You'll hear comments like, you know, God, that Nathan Patterson doesn't look good. Well, he's playing against a boy who's already playing in Atletico Madrid's first team. But that experience has now shaped him and helped him get to where he is, and hopefully, you never know, get to Scotland teams in the Euros or whatever potentially as well. So we must expose them to that. Mark Warburton used to always say that a young player shouldn't be playing against this level of player for the first time when they face them in the Europa League or the Champions League. We should have exposed them to those players 3 and 4 and 5 times leading up to that, so that actually when they go and play against them, say, I recognise that style, it's not a surprise. And if we don't do that, Donald, we're then failing the young player in that process.
I think that it's a really interesting kind of area. You know, I find the whole developing young people, you know, fascinating. And if we take that into football, you know, over this 6 years, what do you think is the characteristics of a coach that's able to do this sort of work now? And is it different from a first team coach?
Yeah, I think it is different from a first team coach. Although there's an argument now to say, because I think even as first team coaches changing, that a coach of a young person should be a developer. They should be a teacher. But is that really different from maybe a manager at first team level? But should that be different from a coach at first team level? Because you're still developing people and you're still trying to make them better. I think coaching has changed. I think there's what I spoke about earlier, that open-minded bit, that you need to be more open-minded to new ideas. I think you need to now be taking on board much more information to help shape that young person. I think one of the challenges as well, Donald, we face for coaching nowadays is the values that you and I have a similar age, you're slightly older than me, but the values that we were brought up with, those values should still stand, shouldn't they? The humbleness, the hard work, all that stuff, that should still stand. But the way we might have been taught it as young people doesn't work with the young people nowadays, right? The influencers in terms of social media, in terms of ages, in terms of parents, in terms of other clubs being interested, that shapes and molds that young person as well. So I think the challenge for our coaches now is saying, right, how can we take these same value set, let's not lose that, but actually make sure that we're inculcating that to the player in a different way. And that's hard because most coaches, you know them, you've done all the courses, end up in coaching because those values are really, really strong to them, right? One of our challenges is, and I love your view on this as well, throughout the UK, do we think academies actually allow diversity to flourish within their academies? Now, what would I mean by that? So the hard-working lad who comes from a good background, who's well supported by their parents, who've got the good values, will tend to flourish in the academy, and rightly so. But see the lad who comes from a different family background. So we get boys from foreign countries. We've got boys who've been brought up in the cages in London. We've got boys who've been brought up in the islands and the Western Isles of Scotland. Their upbringings are completely different. And I'm not sure yet, and this is one of the things that we've set as a target for us over the next few years, that academies actually allow diversity to flourish, because people's cognitive biases always take them towards players that have the same values and mindset as they have. So what about the kid who's got talent but has a different mindset and value? If you were a first team manager, you wouldn't probably sign that kid because he might be disruptive to your group, or it's the All Blacks, make sure we've got the right people in there. If we've got a 15-year-old boy, can we shape and mould and change that person? That he might not have elite values or mindset now, but by the time he's 18 or 19 or 20 that we're presenting to the first team, can we have shaped and moulded? So if he's technically poor, what do? We take him out in the grass and we work his technique and work his technique. If his game intelligence is not good, we work with the analysts and we show him what's a video and we work with him in that sense. See, if it's a personality aspect or a motivation or a values aspect, can we invest as much in that corner of his development as we do in the other three corners? Now, I'm certain we don't, Donald. I'm certain we don't. And I think the psychology area, because you're at the heart of it, is an area that clubs really need to invest in to see if we can develop and shape and mould these young players. And I think that's where a first-team coach and an academy coach differs, because we're shaping, moulding to ultimately present that young player to the first team, hopefully as a really well-rounded elite athlete. Whereas if you're a first-team manager, you're more often than not signing a well-rounded elite athlete. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't sign them. And we'll be successful with some and unsuccessful with others, but I'm not sure diversity in academies works, because coaches tend to have as I say, look for players with the same mindset of themselves.
I think, that's, again, a really important point, Craig, because, I usually speak a lot when I'm doing the coach education about, the importance of emotional intelligence now, for the reason you said. We all tend to be able to coach or get on with people like ourselves. Can you slightly adjust how you speak, how you listen, how you behave to get the best out of someone else? Because that allows you to relate to a wider spread, doesn't it, of players. And if you described it great. If you look in a Rangers dressing room at 16 or 15 or even 18, the diversity of the backgrounds, the spread is, phenomenal. So I think that is a really important point. I think the challenge for the footballer or for the youth footballer is you're against the clock, aren't you? So you've got a timeline where you've got all these windows where you've got the opportunity to go through the door to the first team or the reserves. So, you have to take advantage of it. But also, I think the challenge of the psychological or even the sociological side is, when we're looking at that area, probably the huge impact is you can have less control because the players are away from the academy more. When you're working on the technical or the game model, actually, they're in the academy, and then, you know this, when they go away from the academy, when they're at home and they've got other people in their ears, their mates, isn't it? That's, you have far less control.
That's the course that you did. I think who's the biggest influencer of a young person? It's their parents, isn't it? And they'll spend more time with their parents than they will with us. I think most academies, we centre all our activity on the player. Actually, the parent, who's probably making most of the decisions for that young person anyway, doesn't get that education. And again, for people here, we introduced a course called Performance Parenting, which you led and you designed them. I think that has a massive influence on actually the young person, that if we can educate parents, and I think agents is still a massive issue in the game that we need to sort out in terms of regulation and education, and because they influence that in a big way. But if we can start to influence that, ultimately it's all about the young person at the heart of it, making that young person better. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in that area for sure.
I think, if we come right the way back to where we started, Craig, with and almost kind of to finish with is what you were saying when we were speaking about the boys getting off on loans, going out on loans now at different clubs. If parents and agents and everyone can look at a player now, that there's so many different doors you can go through the door to the first team now, and I think the danger is that you think, if my boy's not playing X by this age, it's gone. And of course it hasn't nowadays, because you can be out there, you can be back, you can go another route, you can come back to the club, You know, there's so many opportunities, I think, these days.
Totally. I think international football is another aspect of that, isn't it?
Yeah.
So when a young player at 15 doesn't get selected for the Victory Shield squad, it feels like the end of the world at that point. But the reality is, when you take the stats from the ones that get selected for Victory Shield and the ones that end up playing for the A squad, often it's quite different players. You get so many factors. You've got all their maturation to take into account. You've got relative age effect to take into account. You've got their coaching age to take into account, because you've heard the stuff from Arsene Wenger that if you're not in an academy by age 12 now, you've missed the boat. Well, that can't be right. Can we introduce programs that allows the catch-up of the learning that they've lost? So I think, you're right. Everybody's got to understand they're on completely different journeys. And you know the other thing, Donald, that's a really strong point I think we should make is, I hear a lot of noise around, and understandably so, because there's been, when players leave academies, it can be really tough for them. And there's been a lot of stuff recently in the media about exit policies and everything else that we do. But you know what I don't think we celebrate enough? I don't think we celebrate enough the journey that the young players on through the academy and what they get from it. So invariably, when somebody does an interview, it'll be with a player that's left the academy that's not enjoyed the experience or been released or whatever. But 99% of the players in these academies love the experience. They're in great pitches, great coaches, working with great staff. I remember standing with the kids at a parents' night one night, under 11s, and said to this wee lad who'd been with us under 8s, how many countries have you been in since the time you've joined Rangers? You've been in 8 different countries, Donald. Right? They would never have got to visit. Had you not been for football? They're with their friends, they're loving it, they're playing against. But what we need to do is manage that expectation. Because the reality is, not all of them are going to be professional footballers. Not all of them are going to be for the Rangers. But if you take someone like Max Ashmore, who you know is in our now, Max was a player, he played for Scotland, he captained our reserve group, he then went on and played at other clubs. He's now back working on a full-time basis with us. But you speak to Max, the teamship skills that he received when he was in the academy, the leadership skills, the communication skills, the variety of knowledge and expertise he got through it. We get 8 staff working in a player care team now. We look after all aspects of them now. We need to be careful we don't mollycoddle. We still produce players that are robust enough to go to the top level. But we should excel and enjoy that journey and actually manage the expectation. You might drop off that journey at 12. You might drop off that journey at 16. You might drop off that journey at 18. But actually just enjoy it while you're on it. Understand the benefits you're getting as a person, which will hopefully set you up later in life. And we need to really push that message more, I think, because there's so much positive work going on out there with a lot of talented young people.
Yeah, and I think that's a great message just to finish with, Craig. Because it is, and sometimes it's a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. It's it's life skills you're learning, and you can, whether you play football or not, you can relate to people, and it'll be something you take with you forever, isn't it? That love of the game.
Totally. I think for your parent, if it's Fletcher who is 9 years old, Donald, as you know, if you ever get that opportunity to go and do all that free of charge, working with people that you can trust and care, and who really care about you, young person, that's got to be the centre of what we do. And see, we produce some good footballers out of it, terrific, which we will do, but let's also produce some good people out the other end as well.
Brilliant. Thanks for your time, Craig, and I know you're busy, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers.